Hey, welcome to Feminist Time Out. Let's take a time out to talk about the problem of feminism and imperialism. Imperialism is a strange beast. It's a huge concept. It has many forms, and those forms change and develop. Start out with, let's define imperialism as a way of thinking that enables some countries to go to other countries and take over. Not only does imperialism enable them to do this, imperialism makes them think they have a moral necessity to. Imperialism and colonization are really similar. The scholar Linda Smith says that colonization is a tool of imperialism. Imperialism is what's led to various periods of conquest. Imperialism matters to feminism for a lot of reasons. One of them is, imperialism is an oppressive way of engaging with the world. And as feminists, we're into resisting those. But much more heartbreakingly, as feminists, especially feminists coming from the West, coming from countries like the US and Canada or Britain and France, we need to understand that imperialism plays a part in how we engage with women not from the West. And also how imperialism has utilized feminist narratives in order to excuse taking over other countries. Before we continue, here's some other stuff that Linda Smith says about imperialism. She says that past imperialisms inform new ones. That means that when we look back in history, we can see connections between imperialisms from hundreds of years ago and imperialisms that are happening today. Imperialism isn't just a method of taking over. Imperialism is a way of thinking or acting, realized in different ways. No matter how imperialism is trying to dress itself up, imperialism is about subjugating people, economic expansion, and domination. There's this pretty famous scholar named Spivak. You may have heard of her because she wrote a piece called Can the Subaltern Speak? In this piece, she's talking about the way that marginalized folks, so those who don't have power and control in their society or in the world at large, can't be heard by those around them, don't get to have their opinions or what they think about the world heard. And because of that, they have less control over their lives. Can the Subaltern Speak is a very dense text. The part I want to focus on is Spivak's discussion of different types of representation. Representation is also a big, complicated idea. What Spivak focuses on is that there's two very distinct definitions of representation. Representation in the form of portraiture. By that we mean the way that when we represent people, we're trying to make an image of them. The other type of representation is an issue of proxy. Now, proxy is when somebody stands in for somebody else. So then representation, when we're talking about proxy, would be when other people are advocating on behalf of someone else. Our elected government officials or union reps. The reason that these ideas of representation matter is because we have to see the way that they work together. So this is a key point of Spivak. The way that the world is represented by portraiture comes to bear meaning on the choices about proxies that we make. And we can see this in the way that feminism has been a tool of imperialism. In her article, Do Muslim Women Really Need Saving?, Lila Abu-Lughod analyzes one of the address that Laura Bush made in her time as First Lady. During Laura Bush's address, she attempts to represent the issues that women in Afghanistan face as all being a problem of the Taliban. And because of that, she's able to claim that America's war in Afghanistan is in fact a war for women's rights. This is gross for a lot of reasons. Firstly, no issue that any woman faces in the world is quite that simple. Afghanistan has a complex cultural history that includes struggle with the US before the Taliban. This explanation completely excludes any of the way that the US has had to do with the rise of Islamic nationalism. It puts forward the idea that the Taliban is completely responsible for sexism within Afghanistan. And it's making claims about another country completely based on Western ideas of women's rights. Abu-Lughod tells us that we need to be suspicious of any time that somebody is claiming to save women and they have a lineup of men with guns behind them. Feminism is also a part of the imperialism of Canada's history. Winona Stevenson tracks the way that during settlement, Indian agents created a portrait of Indigenous women as being both uncivilized and oppressed by the men in their communities. And as such, a colonizing nation could claim that their settlement was an act of charity. These huge powers position themselves as the proxies. And that's so manipulative. It makes it very hard to resist these ideas. Because if you do so, you're someone who hates women. As feminists, we have to work to tease out these ideas. Not all feminisms are equal. Different feminisms will lead to different work in the world. And it breaks my heart that feminism has a long history of being used to dominate others by feminists or by people claiming to be so. Abu-Lughod sees a lot of the problem that Western feminists have as being a problem of knowing how to deal with difference. Luckily for us, she gives us 3 suggestions of how to do better. The first suggestion is that we need to be suspicious of strange bedfellows. By this, Abu-Lughod means that doing feminist work means engaging with those around us. And some people who might be claiming to do the same work that we want to do won't be, or they'll be doing so in a way that's harmful. For example, Laura Bush arguing that an army can fight sexism in Afghanistan. And I think we also need to be suspicious of our suspicions. There's a lot about feminism in the West that we take for granted. Abu-Lughod talks about how Muslim women in the Middle East faced with making the choice between a sexist Islamic movement or an anti-Islamic feminist movement, have chosen a third way, and that way is Islamic feminism. Dean Jacobson talks about the problem that the West has of insisting on secularism in our feminism, and how that makes feminism really unappealing to Muslim women. Abu-Lughod actually says the same thing. Because Islamophobia is a real thing, even and especially for feminists, we have trouble seeing the way that Islamic women are subverting and redeploying their religious tradition. Raquel Fawcett talks about a conference that she went to where Islamic feminists were gathering. At this conference, Muslim women were finally able to get away from conversations that Western women are obsessed with, if the veil is oppressive and the problem of women not shaking men's hands in the Middle East. Instead, they had workshops about various women in the Quranic tradition and the ways that they could learn lessons from them to fight sexism in their societies. They were able to do contextual analysis of the Quran, and in doing so, dispute problematic beliefs right from the source. Fawcett talks about how feminists assert that within the Muslim tradition, no one is allowed to define what a full life looks like for another. Perhaps an important idea for Western feminists to get on board with. So the second suggestion that Abu-Lughod has is that we need to accept the possibility of difference. And this is tricky. Imperialism is kind of like the ultimate rejection of difference. It's saying you are different and you cannot exist that way, so I will try to destroy that difference. When I hear discussions by Western feminists about non-Western countries, sometimes I hear phrases like, I just don't get it, or I can't possibly see why someone will want to live that way. I think we have to acknowledge, as Western women, we're actually not in a good position to try to understand Muslim women. Islamophobia and racism are such a huge part of our lives, and we have to do the work of resisting that. And it's not really fair to Muslim women to put the work of convincing on them. Homa Hoodfar, an Iranian scholar and theorist, has written about the pain and suffering that she's felt engaging with Western women. In these interactions, she has to do the extremely complicated work of both defending her culture, trying not to minimize the sexism that women she relates with face, while resisting Western racism, and not seeing like she's some sort of apologist for dominating ideologies. It sounds like an extremely unfair thing to put on somebody else. I want to talk about Mariana Ortega's analysis of a concept by Marilyn Frye, which is the arrogant I. Frye's idea of the arrogant I is to describe a way of trying to organize the world according to their own wants, desires, and understanding. The arrogant I only serves the purposes of the ones looking. Frye contests this idea with the notion of the loving I. The loving I attempts to consider something outside of oneself. The loving I tries to consider the desires and interests of others. Ortega articulates that the process of the loving I is to look, listen, check, and question. Check the realities that one may have invented or lived by. Question the perceptions that they've used to perceive. In short, one has to consider a different way of looking at the world. Now, Ortega raises a lot of potential problems with this. First and foremost, that loving in a benevolent way is really similar to imperialism. It can lead to somebody thinking that they know what's best for somebody else and act on that in the name of love. So Ortega suggests that there are limits to how much checking and questioning can really mitigate the harm of the Western gaze. And so I've brought this all up to say that as Western feminists, we have to move away from this idea that Muslim women and Muslim feminists need to convince us to get on board with the work that they're doing. Because like Fawcett demonstrates, the work that they're doing is really neat. We need to investigate the way that how we're looking at them is potentially getting in the way of them doing that work. And then we have to figure out how to stop doing that. And Abu-Lughod's third suggestion is we have to resist saviorism. Resist the idea that it's our jobs to go in and save other people, and even that we can do that. Abu-Lughod stresses that we don't exist over and above people. We exist among. The struggles of non-Western countries are intimately tied to the success of Western countries. The richness of Western countries was stolen from somewhere. We have no position of superiority with which to engage with other people. What we can have is a position of resisting imperialism. So let's try to build that. Alright, so in the comments, tell me what you think. What are other ways that the feminist movement is imperialist? What are some ways that we can resist that imperialism? What are some ways that I might have unintentionally been imperialist? In general, how can Western feminists just do better?